Hi, welcome to episode 19, Scales. So again, we're kind of in the boring realm still. Stuff you just kind of gotta get in your head about music. And there's 15 major keys and 15 minor keys. We haven't even talked about minor keys yet, but don't worry, once you learn major keys, minor keys are pretty easy. They're just an adjustment to major keys. Actually, nothing is easy. I should never even use the E word when we're talking about music. Learning about music, and trust me, it doesn't matter if you're learning about music like this in a music theory kind of way, or if you're learning about music by playing on a guitar in your room at night and just figuring it out by ear. Music is hard. Music is hard to learn, and it takes a while to go from individual things that sound good to having a level of abstraction to where you can reproduce that idea or recreate that idea. And I should be clear, in fact, I should probably have a whole episode on it one of these days, that music theory is never telling you what to do. Music theory doesn't pretend to be music theory doesn't pretend to be even different from any other way of understanding music. If you are a musician and you feel like your theory is weak, it just means maybe your lingo is weak and your notational skills are weak or something. It doesn't mean your ear is weak or your understanding is weak. If you're making music and that music is making sense, then you obviously have some understanding of how to put some notes together and make some musical motion happen and all that. So just a little tangent in case you start going down that path of thinking music theory is some golden set of rules that tells you how to make good music, and that if you don't know music theory, you're stupid, or that or even conversely, if you are a lifetime punk rocker who prides yourself on not knowing theory, I'm here to tell you you're wrong. You know more theory than you think you do. You might not know the names for it, but there's no punk rocker who can record more than one album and not have accidentally learned a lot of music theory, is what I'm saying. It's not qualitatively different from any other way of understanding regular Western tonal music, which includes punk rock and includes pretty much all the music you'd ever hear in a regular diet of regular kinds of music you would ever hear on the radio, whether that is top 40 or jazz or hip hop or rock or other kinds of music. Wow, okay, scales. Scales we've talked about already in a more practical way, so here we go with our very theoretical understanding of scales. Every scale has 7 scale degrees before you get back to the top. We call each step in the scale a scale degree, and we use regular Arabic numbers with a caret over them to denote scale degrees. A lot of times we'll call the top one 8 with the understanding that 8 is the same pitch class as 1, because we're talking about pitch classes here, not pitches, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Every minor scale also has 8 degrees when we eventually get to minor scales. Most of the modes have 8 degrees. Did I say 7 before? No, I'm saying 8. Oh God, I'm falling into the regular confusion of music. The scale, technically, we only need to really get to here. It's by convention, we always write a scale out all the way around the circle back to where we started, so that these two are the same pitch class. So even though there's 8 things here, there's only 7 pitch classes. See, the simplest stuff is so confusing in music. If these seem unfamiliar, it's because I don't actually end up talking about them as much as I like to use solfege instead. These mean the exact same thing. And as we learn more, I can explain more why I think solfege is better Actually, why not do it a little bit right now? For one thing, it's a lot easier to sing and more mellifluous to sing, especially 7. 7 isn't fun to sing. T is easy to sing. Another thing is when we do get to other kinds of scales where these scale degrees get altered, raised or lowered from their normal place in a major scale, like it's weird to sing like 1, 2, 3, 4, flat 5. Like you're gonna say flat 5. I mean, it works. It gets the point across, but it's not fun to sing. Whereas in solfege, if we want to sing a flat 5, we could be like do, re, mi, fa, say. A flat sol is called a say. All the solfege syllables have a version of themselves that's sharp or flat. It's cool. We'll get there eventually. You should also know what I call the music theory names of notes, because they do get used by music theory people, and I'm a music theory people, and I don't always be super careful about whether I'm calling things their number or their solfege or their music theory name. And especially when we get into talking about chords, it's really common to use their music theory name. Seriously, I don't know what to call this category other than music theory names. We've already learned some of these. Tonic. Tonic is our do. Tonic is the central key from which all other, to which all other notes relate in like a hierarchical way. And as long as we're talking about hierarchy, let's go, the next most important note is scale degree 5. And we call it the dominant. I've never exactly tracked down exactly why it's called the dominant. I think it has to do with medieval chant, where a lot of chants in certain modes, they didn't have the word tonic, they called it the final, because they based chants off of what the last note in the chant was. But it's usually the same idea as our tonic. And a lot of times they would have a note that they would hang out on to like intone the prayers or hymns or whatever. And they called it the reciting tone or the recitation tone. When you hear like a priest, if you ever go into like an old time like Latin mass and they're just hanging out on one note, a lot of times it's what is the dominant. So maybe that's why. I don't know that though. They called the note halfway between tonic and dominant the median. Right? Midway, median, halfway. Midway between the tonic and the dominant. And then in a classic music theory thing, you know I'm always talking about this stuff. We have words for 2 scale degrees in our music theory names that are based on a wholly disproven branch of acoustics. One day I'm going to do a podcast of a video on this, but like when you play a tonic note on, say, a piano, there's these things called overtones, and 2 of them are your dominant, and then way up higher you'll get your median up there. If you blow in a trumpet and don't press any buttons, like you can get a lot more than one note just without moving your fingers, and it's by making the horn vibrate in its different overtones. And you'll get to the dominant, and then you'll actually get to another tonic, and then you'll get to the median. And well, okay, let me keep those in frame. This is all legit. Your ear identifies the tonic as the main sound, but everything we think of as timbre or tone color is made up of harmonics. And most musical sounds that have a clear fundamental, we call it, tonic, we're also hearing some overtones, including the dominant and the median notes. Because those exist, someone at some point was like, well, there must be a subdominant that we're hearing below the note and a submedian that's halfway to the subdominant. So here's where the subdom is. And then here, la is the submedian. Wrong. I mean, back then, maybe they didn't have the science to say that this was wrong. Now we do. We can get a microphone and put it in front of some sound, and we can analyze the spectrum of that sound, and we can pick out all the waveforms of these overtones. But it turns out there's no undertones. Bad science. Classic music theory move, we just never deleted them from our names. So we still call it scale degree 4 the subdominant, and we still call scale degree 6 the submediant. Stupid, right? Scale degree 7, when it's in a major scale, we call it the leading tone. A lot of times I'll shorten that to LT. When I grew up, LT was Lawrence Taylor, and then at some point he switched to LaDainian Tomlinson, and I don't even know if LT is anything to people who are learning music today, who are the age I was when I learned it, but it doesn't matter. Leading tone, LT. Called the leading tone because, as we've talked about, it's the strongest tendency tone. It wants to go to tonic so bad. And then that leaves the last one. We just name it for being above tonic, which is kind of boring reason to name it, but it gets the coolest name anyhow because it's called supertonic. But it's just super as in above. It's not like super awesome at being tonic. It's not tonic at all. It's above the tonic. And we have some kind of change names. All these names kind of stay the same, and you just say raised or lowered if we raise or lower them, except leading tone. If we have a flat scale degree 7, and we'll get to that, or I shouldn't call it flat. I don't like to do that. I like to call it a lowered scale degree 7. If we've lowered scale degree 7, since it takes away its tendency tone aspect, then we call it the subtonic, which kind of makes sense. The supertonic is one above, the subtonic is one below. So if we want to raise, say, like the subdominant, we say a raised subdominant. If we want to raise the mediant or lower the mediant, lowered mediant. But if we lower the leading tone, it's a subtonic. And if we raise the subtonic, it's a leading tone. Okay. Those are their music theory names. And notice how all this is abstract. Like I'm always saying, music is made out of relationships and activities. And we're not even talking about activity because we're not talking about living music right now. We're talking about scales. And so what scales are these proportional sets of relationships. You plug in any note and you can just get that scale. And the way you keep these proportions right is by making sure you use the right intervals. And I'm going to write this up here because it'll be easier to see. So when we say intervals in music, we mean the distance between usually pitches. And so like the relationship between all these pitches. So, and we've talked about this before in music theory, in a major scale, we always go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. I like to imagine it almost as like, to me, it's helpful to think of it as like, see if you can go with me here. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Like say you had a piece of wood that was like this shape, and you just like go and clunk it down on a keyboard. As long as it has these intervals, right? This whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Then like wherever you stick this leg is the tonic, and everything else will be the right distance away from the tonic, right? That's what I mean by a proportional system. And so that's how we can, this is the abstract way we talk about scales. The last time I talked about them, remember, like we talked about specific scales. So like your C scale is like this. And your, let's do a really far away one, your F sharp scale, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, right? If you wanted to talk about Mary Had a Little Lamb in your C scale, it'd be like E, D, C, D, E, E, E. And here it'd be like A sharp, G sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, A sharp, A sharp. It would get super confusing. We need this level of abstraction to talk about scales. And so, boring episode, it's best to know all 3 of these ways of talking about your scale degrees. And it's also, like I said, best to memorize this whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and be able to derive any scale, anytime, anywhere, any place. for any reason. Goodbye.